When people hear the name the 100 Years' War, they often imagine one long, non-stop conflict that lasted exactly 100 years. But the truth is more complicated, and in some ways even more fascinating. The 100 Years' War was actually a long series of wars, truces, invasions, rebellions, and shifting alliances fought mainly between England and France from 1337 to 1453. That means it lasted about 116 years, involved multiple kings and generations of soldiers, and helped reshape both kingdoms forever. At the heart of the conflict was a dangerous mix of royal ambition, disputed inheritance, feudal loyalty, and control of valuable French territory. English kings had long held lands in France, especially in regions such as Aquitaine, and that created an awkward political reality. The King of England was not just a foreign rival to the French king. In some matters, he was also technically a vassal for his lands in France. Tension had existed for generations, but things exploded when Edward III of England, grandson of Philip IV of France, claimed he had a rightful claim to the French crown after the French succession crisis. The French instead recognized Philip VI, and Edward eventually answered with war. This was not only a war about kings and crowns, it was also a war about identity, power, and survival. Medieval warfare was brutal enough on the battlefield, but the real suffering often fell on ordinary people. Armies marched through farmland. Villages were looted, trade was disrupted, taxes rose, and famine and plague made life even more desperate. For many people living in France, the war was not a grand political struggle. It was a recurring nightmare that returned generation after generation. The early phase of the war strongly favoured the English. Edward III launched campaigns that showed the growing power of the English army, especially the deadly effectiveness of the longbow. English forces won major victories, most famously at Crecy in 1346, where disciplined tactics and massed longbow fire shattered French charges. Soon after came the long siege of Calais, which ended with England taking control of the important port city. These victories shocked Europe and proved that the heavily armoured French nobility could be beaten by well-organised infantry and archers. The war deepened with another disaster for France at the Battle of Poitiers in 1356, where the English captured John II of France, a humiliating blow for the French monarch. Imagine the chaos, the King of France taken prisoner by the enemy, while the kingdom struggled with war, political division, and social unrest. France was forced into crisis, and the burden on the population only worsened. In this phase of the war, it seemed possible that England might dominate France not just militarily, but politically as well. Yet the 100 Years' War was never a simple story of constant English success. One reason it lasted so long is that fortunes changed again and again. Under Charles V of France, the French crown slowly began to recover. Rather than always meeting the English in dramatic open battle, the French relied more on attrition, careful campaigns, and gradual recovery of territory. Over time, many earlier English gains were weakened or reversed. This pattern would define the whole war. One side surged forward, then the other clawed its way back. Then came one of the most famous chapters in medieval warfare, the rise of Henry V of England. In the early 15th century, France was deeply divided by internal political conflict, especially the bitter feud between the Armagnac and Burgundian factions. Henry V saw opportunity in that chaos. In 1415, he invaded France, laid siege to Harfleur, and then began moving toward Calais. But on the way, his exhausted and outnumbered army faced a much larger French force near the village of Agincourt. The Battle of Agincourt, fought on October 25, 1415, became one of the most legendary English victories in history. The French were numerically superior, yet the battlefield worked against them. Mud, cramped ground, confusion, and English longbowmen combined to devastating effect. The French attack collapsed into chaos, and the result was a catastrophic defeat for France. Huge numbers of French nobles were killed or captured. Agincourt did not end the war, but it gave Henry V enormous prestige and made his claim to power in France appear more realistic than ever before. Henry V used that momentum skillfully. Over the following years, he tightened English control in northern France, taking advantage of French weakness and civil war. His success led to the Treaty of Troy in 1420, one of the most extraordinary agreements of the entire conflict. Under its terms, Henry married Catherine of Valois, daughter of Charles VI of France, and was recognized as regent and heir to the French throne. In effect, the treaty tried to disinherit the Dauphin, the future Charles VII, and placed the English king in line to rule both kingdoms. For England, it seemed like the dream of a dual monarchy was suddenly within reach. But history rarely moves in straight lines. In 1422, both Henry V and Charles VI of France died within a short time of each other. Henry's heir was only an infant, Henry VI. That left the English position powerful on paper, but vulnerable in reality. The French still had supporters loyal to the Dauphin Charles, and the struggle entered a new phase. It was in this moment of uncertainty that one of the most extraordinary figures of the Middle Ages stepped onto the stage, Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc was a young peasant woman from Domremy who believed she was guided by divine voices and chosen to save France. In a world dominated by kings, nobles, and professional soldiers, her emergence was astonishing. She persuaded supporters of the Dauphin to give her a chance, and in 1429 she joined the effort to relieve the besieged city of Orleans. That siege had become a symbol of French desperation. If Orleans fell, English power in France would grow even stronger. What happened next changed the war. The siege of Orleans, which lasted from October 1428 to May 1429, ended in French victory and is often described as the military turning point of the 100 Years' War. Joan did not single-handedly win the war, as legend sometimes suggests, but her presence inspired confidence, urgency, and belief at exactly the moment France needed it most. The lifting of the siege electrified the French cause. Suddenly, the English seemed beatable. Suddenly, the Dauphin's supporters had momentum. Joan's impact went beyond the battlefield. She helped escort Charles to Reims, the traditional site of French coronations, where he was crowned Charles VII. That coronation mattered immensely. In medieval politics, legitimacy was everything. A crowned king had an authority that treaties alone could not easily erase. The English may have had legal arguments and military successes, but Charles now had the sacred symbolism of a crowned French monarch. Joan helped transform the war from a dynastic struggle into something closer to a national cause. Joan's own story ended in tragedy. She was captured by forces allied with the English, put on trial, convicted, and burned at the stake in 1431 at the age of about 19. Yet by then, the psychological shift she helped create could not be undone. She became a martyr and a symbol, and long after her death, her legend would grow into one of the most powerful stories in French history. From that point forward, the balance of power gradually moved toward France. Charles VII strengthened the monarchy, improved administration, and built more reliable military forces. French artillery also became increasingly important. Instead of depending only on feudal levies, France began moving toward more centralized royal power and more permanent military organization. England, meanwhile, struggled to hold distant territories and maintain momentum across the Channel. The war that had once seemed to promise an English crown over France now began slipping away. The final blow came in 1453 at the Battle of Castillon, often treated as the last major battle of the 100 Years' War. French forces, using powerful artillery and improved tactics, defeated the English decisively. By the war's end, England had lost nearly all of its possessions in France, keeping only Calais for a time. The long English dream of ruling France was broken. France emerged battered and scarred, but more unified than before. So why does the 100 Years' War matter so much? Because it changed both kingdoms in ways that lasted far beyond the final battle. In France, the war helped strengthen the monarchy and pushed the kingdom toward becoming a more centralized state. In England, defeat in France ended centuries of large continental ambition and contributed to political tensions at home. The war also helped reshape military history. The old image of invincible armoured knights had been badly damaged by disciplined infantry, longbows, and later artillery. Medieval warfare was evolving into something new. It also helped deepen a sense of political identity on both sides. Although people in the 14th and 15th centuries did not think about nationality exactly as modern people do, the conflict encouraged a stronger idea of France as distinct political communities with separate interests and destinies. Over time, this war helped draw a line between two rival kingdoms that would continue shaping European history for centuries. In the end, the 100 Years' War was not really one war, and it was not really 100 years. It was a long, bitter struggle with kings and conquerors, castles and cannon, ambition and survival. It saw the rise of legendary warriors, the humiliation of monarchs, the devastation of entire regions, and the emergence of Joan of Arc, one of history's most unforgettable figures. More than a medieval conflict between England and France, it was a turning point in the making of modern Europe.